All right. Hey, everybody. This is Doug from AR.Watch, and welcome to AR101. This is part one of a three-part series, and we are super excited. As you can see, we have a star-studded panel here tonight to talk about what I'm calling stepping up. And it's stepping up your game from just regular adventure racing into expedition racing. We're going to get into who all's here. You all know who they are. You've seen them at races. You probably watch them fly by, all of you, because this is such an elite panel. But first, I want to kick it to Jeff. Tell me what's going on with Warrior, Jeff.
Well, I am standing right here in downtown Blue Ridge right now. As you can see, I have the train depot behind me right here. We just got here not but 10 minutes ago with the boats on the trailer and the Penske truck and the van, and then 2 U-Hauls. Got all of the equipment here to start setting the course for this weekend's race. We've got 70 teams showing up for this race, so that's really good. I just love this race because it's only an hour away from my house. It's the closest race that we have. And then after that, we go to Tennessee for the Hogback. And again, that's the first concept race that we're doing with a weekend of racing. We have a 12-hour race on Saturday and an 8 on Sunday. And they are completely 2 different courses. So if you sign up for one, you can race on Saturday or the other one on Sunday, or you can sign up for both and get 20 hours of racing. And in between, we're going to be camping out at the YMCA. We rented out the entire facility. That means a 30-room lodge plus all of the extra camping that we need outside, tent camping, RV camping, all kinds of different things there. We have the entire place to ourselves, plus we have 4 cabins as well, all to ourselves. So it's just going to be a really cool concept of just hanging out, racing, having food, having drink, and just hanging out and going to do 2 different races on the same weekend. So Josh Braun and Jen have put together a incredible course, one being a little bit more challenging than the other, and we're going to see how that works out. Other than that, we're going to be heading to Alaska in July, and then we have the Colorado race in September. The Bear sneaks in there in August in between, which we're actually in the negotiations of a new location for the Bear, and hopefully that goes through in August. So that's about it for the rest of the year. Obviously, more AR101s we'll talk about the rest of the year towards the end.
Awesome. Yeah. And as you saw in the post, May is an exciting month for this 3-part series. We're going to do stepping up today. We're going to do teaming up on the 15th. And we're going to go getting started in adventure racing on the 29th. So it gives people plenty of time to kind of get their friends watching what we're doing here and get them involved, so that when we get to the end of the month, we're hoping that we bring in a lot of new people so they can see like what all this is about. So I am super excited about this panel. Like when I started putting together like who was going to come here, I was just praying that everybody that I asked said yes. And so thank you guys for all being here. I want to go around the room. Tell us who you are. Tell us a little bit about your expedition race experience. We're going to kick it off with Mark Lattanzi. So tell us who you are, sir. Oh, you're muted.
He just told us who he was.
I'm the guy who doesn't unmute. I'm Mark Lattanzi. I wrote Squiggly Lines. I guess if you haven't seen it, this is a decent book. I started racing in 2000, and then blundered into an expedition race from Primal Quest a few years later, and kind of did more of those than regular races actually for the last 20 some years. So yeah, that's me.
Yeah, it's funny when you sent me all of your races ahead of time, like we could probably take up the entire hour just reading down the list of the amount of expedition races that you've done.
There were years I did, I think 5, although I think James Gallipo did 6 last year. So, and Mary's probably done, I don't know how many in a single year, but certainly up in that range as well. But
we'll get to the toll that takes on your body later, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Mary, tell us about you.
I'm Mary Chandler. Similar to Mark there, I've raced quite a few expeditions. I think I'm over 50, 53 or 54. I started racing in 2005. I raced for a few years before I jumped in my first expedition race. And I haven't said no yet to the next race that's on the calendar.
Well, that's awesome. And, you know, just to give people an idea of that, they're talking about races that are mostly 5+ days, right? Like for an expedition race. I mean, C2C counts as an expedition race being 3 days. It's on the lower beginner end of expedition racing. But so when you're thinking about the toll that these people are putting on their bodies throughout the year, they're doing 5 or 6 of these races a year. And I can't even imagine that. So, Hunter, let's go to you.
I'll keep it short. I started adventure racing, I guess, took 6 years until I did my first expedition race, which is C2C, and then basically fell in love with the expedition style because it was like all about suffering. And that's what I feel like I'm the best at compared to these fast guys here, which they could suffer better than me, I'm sure now. But started expedition racing. And then for the past, I guess, 2-3 years, I've kind of stepped back from the expedition adventure racing and kind of dived into these long expedition runs, basically. But it's the same type of lessons you learn. They translate pretty well of knowing how to suffer and everything. But yeah, that's kind of my short little spiel.
And I mean, we'll just go straight into your dad too, because I mean, he's on here not just for Warrior, but because of his experience. So Jeff?
Well, you know, all of us here on this panel is actually, I think, did Eco Challenge in 2019. And which was probably by far the longest at 11 days of racing in Fiji. But I mean, that was the pinnacle of my racing. I wanted to retire after that one, and I pretty much did. Up to that, I'd been racing with Hunter for many, many years, doing Cowboy Tough, doing C2C, doing all these other expedition races leading up to the final, which would be Eco Challenge. So we definitely need to talk about Eco Challenge because that is an expedition race beyond anything that most of us have ever done.
Awesome. Jesse, I mean, not only are you fast, but you also go long. So tell us about your expedition racing experience.
Jesse
That's what
Spanger
she
from
said.
Richmond, Virginia. I definitely the least experienced person on this phone call looking around the Zoom screen. But I was lucky enough to go to Eco Challenge Fiji. And I do think Hunter and Jeff left out the Race to Survive Alaska. That seemed expedition-y and long and grueling. And I think Jeff,
I would say
like,
40
lost a ton
days
of weight on that.
probably
Yeah.
qualifies.
But I've only
Eating
done
mussels.
probably half a dozen expedition races. So these other folks on the call are much more experienced.
Chip and Andrew, we'll go with you and we'll finish with Andy.
So we both started racing in 2016, and it took us a couple of years to do our first expedition race. Now I've done 16. You've done 17. We did not do Eco Challenge. Our longest race was 9 days, and we did 6 expeditions last year. That was the most we did in 1 year. And yeah, anything else to add?
Yeah, it's our favorite type of race. Like once you start getting into that 3+ days, it's just the longer the better. And now it's fun. You go back to the C2C and it's like, oh, this is just a sprint. Like after you've been out there for a year, and it's like, what's 3 days? You can hold your breath for that time.
Yeah.
And you know, maybe Jesse's less experienced, but we're probably the slowest out of all of the panel members.
I don't know about that either. Like you guys are all like, I will say that that's what makes this panel even more amazing is how humble all of you are. And just what I love about it is if you guys see these people at races, they are so approachable and so humble. They will always take a minute to talk to you. Doesn't matter who you are. If they don't know you, it does. If you want to talk adventure racing, these people will do it. So Andy,
I'll take 5 minutes.
right?
You know me. You can't shut me up.
Mr. Andy Bacon.
Hey, my name is Andy Bacon. I started racing in 2006, doing the Odyssey College Sprint Series, if anybody remembers those way back in the day. 2 years after that, in 2008, I did a couple expedition races, including Primal Quest Montana. And I remember that year, all 3 of those, PQ is the longest race I've ever done. I think took us 10 days. But I had no clue what the heck I was doing in all 3 of those. And I've done some probably most every year since then. happy to be here.
That's awesome. Well, like what's impressive to me is that I mean, when you guys are talking about this, you would think that after doing so many of these, you would either be burnout. Like I came from the triathlon world where we talked about, you know, when you start out with a sprint, you thought that that was like the biggest thing that you were ever going to do, and then you work up to an Ironman. Well, like Chip was just saying, you start out now, you're looking at C2C as if this was if it was a sprint, because you guys have done so many multi-day events. And it's a different kind of, it's a different training system. It's a different preparation than doing the fast ones. Like it's probably harder now to go out and run a 5K than, you know, for somebody that trains strictly for marathons. Do you guys find that it's harder to go out and do like a 4-hour race or 6-hour race because you're literally going balls to the wall the entire time? And I mean, Andrea, I know we talked about this when at Nash, at what was the last race where like it took a minute to kind of get into it, but
It probably was solo nationals.
solo nationals, that's what it
I
was.
don't know, but yeah, that the shorter races, I totally agree. They almost seem harder because you're just pushing that much harder. But they're just a totally different ball of wax almost.
And I guess I'll chime in on that. Like when you're doing like a 24-hour race in your backyard, 911's available and all of that. Yeah, you go light and fast, and who cares about blisters and chafing? You deal with that tomorrow. And then you're in Africa for 8 days and you're like, whoa, you know, there isn't 911. Nobody's coming to get you. You actually need some more equipment because things could go wrong. And it goes from an adventure race to an emergency situation. So, you know, I mean, we're not aiming for the podium in any of these big international races. So we're going to go a little heavier, a little more stuff, a little bit more. Just we want to be sure that we're okay if anything goes wrong on any teammate, because you might be there for 24 hours waiting on evacuation to get to a hospital. So it's just a different sport altogether, in my opinion.
Yeah, and that kind of leads into the first thing I want to talk to you guys about, which is like kind of the training and preparation for an expedition level race. I think a lot of racers that are listening, you know, they've gone out and they've done 12-hour races, 24-hour races, and that brings its own challenges. But with stepping into multi-day events, your training changes, the amount of time that you have to put in preparation for those races change, and then what it does to your body during the races change. So Mark, I want to start with you because I think you're the most experienced person on here. I'll put it like that. When you first stepped into this, did you start out doing expedition racing mostly, and then kind of do the other ones as training races, or?
Well, I think Mary has me on the experience, but I sort of jumped pretty quickly when I did my first 12-hour in 2024, and the next one was 24, and in 2004 I did a 5-day, and I was the guy that just, you know, we just blundered into it. We had no idea what was going on. I mean, it was different back then. You know, the sport has changed a lot. You know, they gave you this mandatory gear list. We didn't even know what some of the stuff was. And so we just gathered it all up. You had skills tests. You had to go find somebody to certify you and this and that. But you showed up and you just blundered your way through, you know, and it was what it was. And now I think the sport has matured, and there's a lot more information out there for people to figure out what they need to do to, you know, to go do an expedition race. But I wouldn't discount just blundering into one. I mean, it's a blast. You know, you kind of you get what you get, and it's an adventure, just like the name says. And so, maybe that's not the method for everybody, but you know, it's one way to get into the sport.
Hey, Mark, don't you remember back in the day when we started, there was limited information on what an actual expedition race was. I struggled to find information. There was no squiggly lines back then. There was no, it was limited. There was a couple of YouTube videos, but they were so poorly done, you had no clue what it was going on. It was really limited. But now, the future, and right now, there's so much more information out there to make people feel more comfortable about diving in.
For sure. And like a logistics diagram, that's a relatively new thing, right? I mean, you showed up and it's like, okay, pack your bins and then we'll tell you what you're gonna do. You know, it wasn't the other way around. So it's definitely, it's more evolved in structure.
I think
Yeah,
the tricky thing is it's flipped on its head now. Like you guys both said, there's so much information out there. I want to like touch on what Mark said about sometimes the best thing you can do is just jump into it. Don't like spend years researching everything, making sure you have everything dialed, and then you finally show up to the race 5 years later, because that probably won't happen. I think the best advice, like Mark was kind of hinting at, is like, yeah, do research, get some information, but jump into it. You're going to fail the first time. I failed the first like 5 expedition races, had no clue what I was doing, and then you learn from that and keep going if you survive. So have enough information to survive.
well, and Mark's obviously being humble about squiggly lines. I think anybody who is got involved in adventure racing since that book came out reads that like kind of like the Bible as you prepare yourself to get ready and go out and do your first adventure race. I know I did. I actually got to do one-on-one training with you out on your course, which was amazing. But I think that Mary, you talked about you started out and then it took a little while before you got into expedition racing. What was kind of that deciding factor that made you think, I want to step the game up, I want to move up into those bigger races?
For me, I mean, I was pretty lucky because I got asked by other teams that had the experience. So my first expedition race, I was with 3 guys who had done several. So that was super easy because they basically guided me on what I needed and what I should be doing. But for me, the best way to get ready for an expedition was just doing more racing, short, just the shorter stuff, 24 hours, getting an opportunity to race through the night. Things change drastically after your second night without sleep. So, especially for navigators, they get the experience of navigating at night. That's huge. I also learned, your feet take a beating. It's totally different after you've been on your feet for more than 2 days. So it's getting out with a heavy pack, carrying that extra weight, because in a shorter race, you usually don't have to carry much. But in expedition races, if you're out there for 24 hours of food, and water and the mandatory gear, that all weighs a bit that you're not used to, or carrying a pack raft. So, getting out there and using your gear and and getting some longer stuff in is all easy ways to make yourself a little more ready for the expedition.
Yeah, not every race feeds you like Warrior does. Uh, and we'll talk a little bit about that and the difference in having to carry all of your own nutrition and hydration and make sure that you're stopping and getting things when and where you can. I'm sure makes a huge difference. I mean, I'm not in that realm yet, but hopefully, within the next year, you're going to see AR watch out on some expedition races as well. Jesse, you talked about how you're probably the junior experienced person in this room. I'll put it that way. How has that, like, getting involved in the expedition races, like, everybody knows you're fast. How was that step up into the expedition racing realm?
Well, the first one I did was solo. I wouldn't recommend that. But I know I've raced with some of the people on this call, and one of the best things I do is just race with people that are more experienced than me, and I've learned so much from them. Just watching how they transition in every race, whether somebody's more or less experienced, I'm learning from them, and I learned way more, if they are experienced. Like this past race, I did the Epic a week and a half ago, and I never raced with Brian Mayer. He's super experienced. He does things I don't usually do. Like we get out of the boat and he just grabs all the paddle gear and goes. Like I'm sitting there fiddling around with the paddle bag and doing something with the paddle. No, just grab the crap, let's go. And so I guess when I jumped to these expedition races, when I did like Endless Mountains, I raced with Rib Mountain, who have probably done 100 different adventure races, and not so many expedition races, but I'm always learning from them. And I'm like, Tim, what's going through your mind right now and you're navigating? Or looking like when Mark's navigating, and I can also have a map too. I can see what lines he's taking. So I'm always trying to learn from those people that I'm racing alongside. And I think when I learn from them, I write down what I've learned from them, and I try to take that to all my next races. So trying to be like a sponge with the people I'm racing with, and try to be like a sponge with Andy when he's not racing and when he's like traveling. And watching Andy eat from different coffee shop to coffee shop. That's also a learning experience.
Well, and I think that's part of like this diving in thought process, right? Like get out in the woods and get lost and then figure out how to get back to or find out where you are and make the mistakes so that when you're doing these kind of races, like you learn from them as you go. Andy, what are some of the biggest things like when you moved up into expedition racing that you had to learn and really get grasp before becoming as successful as you have been?
I mean, honestly, I think one of the biggest differences between expedition racing and I'll call it shorter race, but 24 hours is not like a short race for most of the world, right? But often these expedition races, they're longer and you're traveling. So I think one of the hardest things for me when I first started doing expedition races is like wrapping my head around what do I have to bring, not only like for the race, like what I'm going to be out there, but how am I going to travel? How am I going to ship my bike? How all these things were really new to me. And that takes a lot of like mental and physical energy to like think through. And really the only way you figure that out is to do it. So I echo what everybody said about sort of just like jumping in. The physicalness is certainly there. Like you have to carry a heavy pack more often, like if you're gonna do a longer race, like definitely 100%. Just you got to go do it, and you're gonna mess up and you're gonna learn and you're like, oh, that didn't work, whatever. And every time you do it after that, it's gonna get a little bit easier because you always learn. But I think just the logistics of it is like a whole different ballgame, and you really do learn something every single time. Yeah.
And logistics are something I think that for those of us that are not at this level, that are going out to these races and we're seeing you guys, one of the things that always strikes me is how small your packs are compared to mine, right? Like I have all of this crap in mine because I'm like, I think I need this. I don't know if I need that, but I probably might. What do I do with it? How can I go on less water? Like, how are you drinking? Like, I watched Jesse at Shenandoah Epic, and I think you had on like a waist belt. And I was like, what the heck, man? Like everybody else has, packs on with all kinds of stuff in it. And here you are with like the smallest thing possible. But does that come from kind of the trial and error and like going to races with a full bin and coming home with all of that same stuff?
Well, Doug, it's kind of like, everyone packs their fears. And I did it. Hunter did it. We've all done it. In the beginning, and also too, mandatory lists from race directors used to be 40 items. You had to have a big pack, but they've reduced that. Safety's gotten better. Now that we have trackers, we don't have to have as much safety gear. You don't have to pack as much. You realize you don't have to have as much gear. And races have gotten more efficient with allowing you to have less gear. So now packs have gotten smaller. Also too, a big thing to do is volunteer for an expedition race. If you want to do an expedition race, you don't know exactly what's going on, volunteer. That's a lot of work for one. And you get to see what all of these top runners and racers are doing at transitions. How are they packing? How are they doing things? And they'll talk to you. You can talk to other volunteers. That's one of the best ways to do it.
Well, and Chip and Andrew, I want to talk to you guys about this because so I got involved in adventure racing in 2020, like a lot of people, right? Like that came in watching Eco Challenge, and the pandemic kind of got people in, looking at what can I do outside. And so I've watched you guys like start from like a fledgling expedition like team to being one of the top American teams in races. How has that changed for you guys and your preparation and like moving into races, like expedition like races?
So there's just really no substitute for experience. I really think there's just no substitute. So, we get better every race that we do, knock on wood. But like Jesse said, we're always learning. We've had a lot of different teammates, so we learn from everyone that we have experience with and who we're racing around. Yeah, what do you want to add?
I guess two things. One is a typical athlete, like maybe you're running and you're biking and yada yada, but a lot of times you're on a treadmill, you're on road, etc. The minute we got into adventure racing, now it's like, wait a second, we need to be trail running with a pack, up and down stuff, wonky terrain, same thing, mountain biking instead of road biking or whatever. you can't just like be on a treadmill and then go and think that you're going to do well in an adventure race. So you have to be weighted and you have to be in the same environment you're training. So our lifestyle shifted from just a typical athlete over to an adventure athlete. So almost 100% now is on trails and in the woods. I mean, yeah, if it's raining, snowing, et cetera, it's a late day at work. Maybe we go into Planet Fitness and do some weights or whatever, but most of the time we're out there in the real deal with a weighted pack. And then the second thing is, and this is for everybody, it doesn't matter where you are in your journey on any type of sport. The minute you've done like the longest thing that you've ever done, you've kind of pushed that limit. Everything below that is easy now. And the more you get into these longer and longer races, like, and again, Mary and Mark have done way longer stuff, but like the one for me that stands out, like we did the Paraguay national championships, I'm sorry, world championships a couple years ago. And like the first leg was a trek leg was longer than the C to C. I mean, we were out there for like 78 hours. It's like, holy crap. So from here on out, every trek that's less than 3 days is like, big whoop, we've done 3 or more. And like when you're on a 48-hour bike leg across Africa, it's like, this is easy. And so everybody on this call and everybody that aspires to push themselves, just realize the human body and the human mind is capable of going way more than you expect. You just have to keep pushing that limit until you find your limit. And for most of us, we're continuing to push because we haven't found it yet, where we say, okay, that was too long. I'm not going any further. If you just are strong and incrementally graduate up and up and up, you will be amazed at what you can do. So just give it a shot and push.
I've found my limit a few times, by the way.
But then
I
you
still
continue
keep
to push
going.
them. So like that has changed though, right? I mean, like that's the beautiful thing about adventure racing, I think, is that people think what their limits are, and then they get to that and think, I have more. I mean, Hunter, you and I talked about during your FKT, how you had a runner that came out and thought like, oh, I'm only going to run this far. And then she ended up like doubling the furthest run like she'd ever done because she never thought that she could do it. And then she just did it. And so the summary that I'm getting from all of you is get out there, sign up for an expedition race. What I love about adventure racing too is it's a choose your own adventure. You don't have to be like these teams and go after every point. You go after the ones that are strategic for you. The next thing that I want to really talk about is hydration and nutrition for these expedition length races. Mary, I want to come to you first.
Snickers bars and Skittles.
I'd like to pass on that question. I'm the worst person to learn from hydration and nutrition.
But see, I think that
anybody but me.
I think it speaks to the personal nature of nutrition and hydration as well.
Oh,
right?
Totally. Like, it's different for everybody. And some stuff has worked for me, maybe my first expedition race, and other stuff never again. It's a trial by error, and some stuff that you eat out there tastes good on the first day. It does not taste good on day 4. So, I mean, the best advice I can give you is variety and try to avoid the dry stuff, because I mean, in the end, it's the applesauce and the pudding that might not have that many calories, but it tastes so much better than, the bag of chips or whatever and just avoid the sports nutrition stuff. That's, some of that's good for sure, but this one guy I met, he did a 24-hour race, and he said he asked us what he ate, and he said he ate 24 shot blocks or 24 packets of like Cliff Shots. And we're just like, yeah, no wonder you felt like crap by hour 5. So, variety is the key, and just, trying to get some real food in you is always the best you can do. And if there's a cafe and you aren't in a big rush, stop and get a burger, stop at a gas station. There's no rules that says you can't do that. But yeah,
I think a lot of
I am the worst person to ask about.
I think the sport nutrition stuff is more built for, shorter stuff, right? It's stuff for like marathoners and maybe some Ironman-ish races. But most of those are not built for multi-day, getting you all the nutrition that you need to get. So Mark, what do you do to make sure that you're getting proteins? And
so I'm the second worst person to ask about that.
I'm trying to make it get better.
We're just going up. We're just going up the list.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, but I can add, like, by day 3 and 4, all I want is salty food. I'm so done with any kind of candy and anything like that. I need real food and salty food, but I try and eat something real every 12 hours, whether it's salami and cheese or, or a hamburger on day 1 or 2 or things like that. And also to Mary's point, the variety, but I've found that over the years, things that used to work, I can't eat anymore, and so it's not, it also, you change over time. And so you kind of, it's a moving target that you're trying to hit, your nutrition, because it's like, oh, this used to work and now I can't stomach it, and so.
Andy, I mean, I don't know if this is the right progression now, if we should go to you first.
I'll take it. I do have one funny story. I'll share a lesson learned about variety of food. Years ago, I had the great idea of putting things that I thought would go really good together in the same little Ziploc bag. And by like the second or third or fourth day, whenever I like reached into that bag, I learned that that was a horrible, horrible mistake. Because what was left was these 2 flavors that when I was packing seemed to be awesome, not so much. So my advice would be variety for sure, and compartmentalize your food, because you never know how those things are going to meld together.
Well,
and I'll also add that another plug for your teammates: nobody's food tastes better than your teammates' food. When you've eaten everything you had and it all is awful, and your teammate pulls out something absolutely magical and they offer it to you, it's like the greatest gift in the world. So,
well, the first year that I did C2C, I thought it would be a really great idea to get a Jimmy John's sandwich and like put it in my bag for later. And I went to take like the first bite of it while we were on that 40-mile paddle on that one. That was like, for me, that was the longest day ever. And I like took a bite and I was like, this is the driest, worst thing I've ever had in my life. And I couldn't even get through the first bite. So Mary, what you were talking about is like having something with moisture, like, because when you put dry stuff like that in your mouth that's been sitting in your bag for 24 hours and you're like, oh, this is going to be delicious. It was not.
Well,
So-
and then
to the-
like, to add on too, some stuff's easier to eat when you're paddling versus biking versus running. So that's something I had to learn too. Like paddling, you want stuff that's easy, short, calories, but in a small bite, that you can just throw something in your mouth and keep paddling and not waste any time. Biking is also hard to eat, but like trekking, you can usually get a lot more calories in you, just because you're usually just hiking along, and you can have that snack that you've been waiting for, because maybe maybe it requires a fork. You can't have anything like that on the bike or paddling sometimes.
And I mean,
One thing to keep in mind.
I kind of want to get the doctor's opinion on this, because I feel like he will probably have the best advice when it comes to nutrition. So
I don't know. I had
Jesse,
2 thoughts with the hydration thing and avoiding dry foods, like Mary said. Sometimes I'll bring I know we were bashing on sports nutrition, but some powder to mix with water, because sometimes I can't eat anything. Like so if I can mix Tailwind or whatever it is, just with the filtered water, sometimes it's the only calories I can keep down. So I try to carry some powdered nutrition with me. And the second thing is, we've talked about some of the resources for these things, like Mark's book, Squiggly Lines, but there's some really good resources online for all these things. And then one of them is kind of hard to find, is the Rootstock Racing Expedition Playbook. Talks about a lot of the things that we've talked about here. If you go into the Endless Mountains race on their website and then click through there, you can find it. And Brent or Rootstock's written all this stuff out. So I highly recommend that to everybody.
awesome. No, that's a great resource. We'll try to post it in the comments if we can, once this on Facebook, so that everybody can find that. Hunter, I know
I'll second Jeff's comment about the hydration, the powdered stuff. The great thing about the powdered stuff is that like it's really easy to drop in like a bag that you're going to see a couple of days later. And there's definitely been times when that's the only thing that I could eat. Like I'll second Jesse that. It's great, especially when you're riding a bike. You could throw a couple hundred calories in a bottle and just kind of like sip on it. So I know it's kind of, the reputation can be up or sort of down, but I definitely think it's something that you got to mess around with a little bit, but definitely look into it. And they have, drinks that have a good mix of carbohydrates with a little bit of protein as well.
Yeah, Perpetuum is good.
Yeah, I mean, Hunter, I know when you did your FKT, we talked about the smoothies that your dad was making, and how that was, I mean, that was a lot of your caloric intake during I mean, obviously that was a crazy multi-day, more than what any of the adventure races that you're going to do. And you're probably not going to find a Smoothie King or a Jeff Leininger in a ambulance on the side of the road making you smoothies, though we keep trying to make that happen. We're definitely trying that. But Hunter, what is your like go-to nutrition? Because you're another one of those crazy people who I see out at like C2C with like the smallest backpack ever. I feel like it's like one of my kids' backpacks. And I'm like, how are you doing this?
Yeah.
Just watch his Instagram, sticks of butter.
Oh yeah. But
Yeah, don't trust the Instagram no matter what. It's great that we have such a great panel of people with so much knowledge, more than me. And it's like just echoing everything people have been saying here, like the variety of food. I've made mistakes so many times where I pack for a 5-day race and the first day I eat something and that's all I have for the rest of the race. And by day 4, I'm like, this is disgusting. I don't eat anything. Then I start bonking. I think the biggest advice would be for expedition length is stay on top of the calories, because everything goes wrong as soon as you fall behind calories. For me, like mentally, I'm positive 99% of the time of a race, but as soon as I fall behind calories, I start getting like negative mental talk and I like think about quitting or I get sleepy. But as soon as I realize that happening and I just put more food in my mouth, I wake right up and I feel positive again. So I think just staying on top of the calories is really key. And I'll give Mark credit this. It might be just a rumor, but I heard a few years back about Mark in racing that he would come into a TA and eat like a bunch of calories in one sitting, like a meal, and then not eat anything for like a 4-hour trek or something. Is that about right, Mark? Is that just a rumor?
Well, it's exaggerated. So I tend to eat about 100 calories an hour while I'm on the course, and then 1,000 to 2,000 in the transition, if
Yep.
my teammates will let me sit there that long. So yes and no.
and is that something that you're putting in your bins, or is that stuff like, are you getting like freeze-dried stuff at REI and like adding water? Like, what do these meals look like? Because I think as people are preparing to possibly do their first expedition race, like they all are like, what do we eat for 5 days?
Yeah. So I took that rumor and ran with it, as in for C2C type of race, I just eat a bunch of food at the TA when they're cooking stuff, and I eat like 2,000, 3,000 calories. But then I stay pretty adamant. I eat a lot in races, so I eat about 250 calories every hour on the hour, no matter what. On top of those 2,000, 3,000 calories I would eat at TAs. So I'm never falling behind calories. But it depends on the race. If you're not doing the C2C and it's more expedition style and it's a lot of backpacker meals, and the liquid calories are huge. I discovered that during the Florida Trail. Yes, you're not going to be able to have smoothies and stuff during adventure race, but liquid calories, I was doing Tailwind in my drinks, every single bottle. So it was like 250 calories just from drinking. And then I would eat that. Since I was running on these long FKTs, I'm burning a little bit more calories than adventure race. So I'm having to eat like 350 calories an hour. But again, I think the biggest advice is just staying on top of the calorie intake the entire time. As soon as you start getting sleepy, keep eating. As soon as you start getting cranky, keep eating. And then I think sectioning off those meals is key too for mentally. So you're not just snacking for 7 days. You're like snacking most of the time, but then you're getting these 2 or 3 big meals throughout the race.
Andy,
Good
what do you
idea. I was going to say that, Mari, you can jump in. But one thing I learned from Mark, I think, was right before you go down to sleep, it's a great idea to eat a big meal. So if you know you're going to sleep for 1, 2, 3, 4, however many hours, crush 1,000, 1,500 calories right before you get in your sleeping bag and go down for a rest, and you wake up like a new person.
All I was going to add is that there's so many foods out there that you don't need. Like, people think of backpacker meals and they think you need hot water. You don't. Like, a lot of them, especially mountain houses, I've had good luck with. It might take longer to hydrate, but you don't need hot water. And not every expedition race has like Warrior where you can have a feast. That's very rare. And some expedition races have no water, some have hot water. So you got to be able to adjust to those things. But like ramen, couscous, instant potatoes, all those things you just throw in a freezer Ziploc bag and add water. And that, after 10 minutes of running around, you're going to have what feels like a real meal, and not just a bag of dried fruit or something.
Yeah, I did Jesse Tubbs expedition training up by him, and he said he takes a peanut butter jar and cleans it out, and then he will throw water and a ramen thing in that to put in his pack, and then it just takes longer. But then when you stop 45 minutes or an hour later, like it's ready to go. And Jesse, I'll tell you that the year that I drove back with you from C to C, I learned so much about like compartmentalizing food and like having it all set up in like the TA. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I'm not the best in TA. Um, I actually just listened to Mary's podcast on the Dark Zone, and she summarized it well. Of like if you get a schematic beforehand of the race, and you know that leg 2 is going to be X, hours long, and you guesstimate that long, then having a Ziploc bag in that bin and just being able to grab leg 2 stuff is a super fast and efficient way to do it. And some people, if they don't have those estimates, will have like 1,000-calorie bag or like a 6-hour bag. I don't know if that's what you're getting at, but
Yeah, no,
having
that was.
things ready to
Exactly,
go
yeah.
in your bin, so you're not sitting there messing with individual things in your bin while your teammates are staring at you, is probably a good idea.
And you're battling sleep monsters and you don't know what you need, but you can easily look at it and say, there's 1,000 calories, right? Like, let's put that in the bag because we're going to be hiking for the next, 20 hours.
Yeah, you have it
Yeah,
ready
Doug,
to go.
I'd
You
like
don't want to be
to-
digging through it when you get there.
I'd like to hear from Chip and Andrea because they have the most unique way of getting food prepped for a race.
We do.
I don't know about unique. I don't know. You go first, and I've got a couple of things I want to say. But
Well, I'm not sure what Jeff's talking about.
I'm talking about the pizzas, the McDonald's
Yeah,
cheeseburgers,
okay.
all the
Yeah,
stuff you guys buy prior.
yeah.
Okay.
So we're gonna. Okay, I agree. Well, let me back up a little bit before we get into the exactly. I want to tell you the why before we tell you the what. I agree with everything everybody said. What I want to do is fill in a couple of little gaps we didn't touch on. Let's start with hydration. A lot of times what you're trying to do is replace your salts and your electrolytes, because like straight water will just wreck you over a long period of time of sweating. And so we do the same thing everybody was saying. We have your normal hydration pack that's straight water, and then I have a bottle that I'm putting, powder into that can either be calories or no calories. But normally we're using scratch packets, which is similar to Tailwind and all of that. I know the Bend Racing loves the 4-Hour Fuel that has a ton of calories. But the idea is I can drink straight water, or I can sip off my bottle, and I can kind of govern how much salt I'm taking in. Also, the salt tabs are another way to do that real quick if you don't want to do the powdered stuff or it's messing with your tongue. So that's one thing on the hydration. The other thing, on the food, the heart rate, I think, is governing a lot of what you're eating. You're getting ready to bed down, go to sleep. You're trying to wind down. You can eat a sandwich and crush a lot of calories, eat a Mountain House. Everything's fine. You're sprinting. There ain't no way you're eating a big sandwich with cheese and meat and all that while you're running at high heart rate. That's where you want the Tailwind and all the liquid calories, because your body's going to puke it up if it's not super easy to digest. So, but also the things that you eat make your tongue get jacked up. Like, it can be either really salty foods or sugary food or a lot of the processed bars. After 3 days, you'll start getting blisters and stuff on your tongue, and then you don't want to eat anything because it hurts, especially things that are spicy. So I'm a big fan of the real food, which is going back to your original question. We've done Jersey Mike's subs, because they make a gluten-free sub where we chop it up into little strips, and we put it in a vacuum sealer and get it so that there's no air. And it kind of stays juicy. Of course, you don't do tomatoes and lettuce that get gross, but the mustards and things that it'll last for 3 or 4 days. Pizza's another one. You take 2 slices, flap them together face to face, put it in a Ziploc bag, suck the air out. That'll be there for 3 days, no problem. And so yeah, we like real food. Peanut butter and jelly, and you add honey to it to keep the hydration a little bit high. It adds a lot of sugar, but also mixes it with the proteins and all that. That I find that doesn't mess up my tongue, but you also need the stuff that's the high heart rate stuff, because you're not going to down 2 pieces of pizza riding a bike while you're hammering.
Well, and I know the Wandering Wicks after C2C talked about how they took like 14 McDonald's cheeseburgers with them for C2C, and that's the only nutrition they had for the entire race, which I thought was amazing. But
Hey, two quick things, Doug, related to mouth care, which I think most people don't think about when you go to like 2 or 3 or 4 days. Bringing a toothbrush with you and brushing your teeth whenever you can is huge. There's nothing that could make your life miserable than getting like a little sore in your tongue or your mouth or something, and everything you eat is going to hurt like hell. So I didn't know that when I started racing, and now it's as much as you can, just brush your teeth, and again, it's like a new person.
Nice.
Mouthwash too. Add mouthwash into your TA bin. That's easy to.
Oh yeah, that's easy, right? You can just take a little bottle with
Yeah, I
you.
mean, it keeps you awake too.
That doesn't just destroy your
but,
mouth when you wash it out with that, like a Listerine? It
Yep.
seems like it would hurt it, but it's okay.
That's good. It cleans it
wakes you
out.
up. No, it wakes
Okay.
you up, and eventually that it helps kind of clear any of that soreness in your tongue and your teeth.
And
It's,
the Listerine strips,
Oh,
the
the little
dehydrated
tabs,
ones
yeah.
that just melt on your, oh, they're spectacular in the middle of the night, right? You
Oh
just-
yeah, that'll wake you up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and light.
So Mark, while we're talking to you, I want to talk a little bit about like pacing and expectations for expedition races and how it differs from like shorter races. Going into like, obviously you guys are all elite, and don't shake your head, Andrea, because I can see that. Like all of you guys are elite, so your pacing is very much different than most of the rest of us. But let's talk to like the people who are getting started and like kind of the expectations of pacing and expectations going into an expedition length race, Mark.
So one thing I would say is that it's a lot slower than you think it is. So we always have an Excel spreadsheet or a Google spreadsheet with a planning document if we get the logistics diagram, and we can put out, you know, how long a leg is and how long we think it's going to take. And most of our planning speeds are, you know, trekking is 5K an hour. Paddling is 5 or 6K an hour. Biking is 10K an hour. You know, those aren't fast. And you can obviously go faster, but you have to deal with navigating and getting lost and malfunctions and all the other things that you don't factor in. So yeah, when we're biking, we're actually going much faster than that. But there's so many other things that affect your pace.
Yeah.
So when you're thinking about, oh, it's, you know, whatever, it's a 50-mile bike ride and I can go 10 miles an hour, so that's 5 hours. Well, that's
5 hours if you were just going hard the whole time. Yeah.
Right. It's going to be, so you're going to need more food, and you're going to have, you know, and you're going to have to realize, am I going to be in the dark because the time is going to get longer? And so yeah, I think that the big thing with pacing is that it really is slower than, you know, when you're planning, you have to account for all the other things that are not actually pedaling your heart out.
Mary, what would be your best tip for someone that's thinking about expectations and pacing going into their first expedition race?
I mean, Mark's pretty much spot on there. Is it does always take longer than you think, but a lot of it, like for me, is people have to also consider how the race is, what's making the race. Like, you have to have mandatory checkpoints. Are there extra checkpoints? Because that varies too. And so maybe if you're a new team, you go for just the bare minimum. You go for things that you can handle one leg at a time, and just get through it. And if you did better than you thought you did on that first leg, then maybe the next leg you add a couple extra bonus checkpoints if they're there. You can adjust as you go. Maybe the weather's crap, maybe you're tired. I mean, things change throughout the race, so you just have to be able to adjust. And you know, everyone always starts out at a pretty much a sprint, the first like 400 meters, which is usually kind of the big joke of adventure racing, but it slows down, and as you get out there and get into a rhythm, you actually will feel yourself, you know, kind of settling into your groove, into a pace. And it so varies with who you're with. Maybe you got some strong paddling team, maybe you got some strong bikers. You know, you just got to be able to adjust with all that. And most of the time, race planning now like has gotten easier, in which the race director will kind of give us a time range of, you know, maybe they think a fast team will go 10 hours, and maybe they think a slow team will go 30. So if you're a mid-pack team or you're not sure, then, you know, plan for that middle of what you're going to do. But the biggest thing is not to overthink it, and just, it's always better to have a few extra pieces of food amongst you, or an extra battery if you're going to be out, because you just never know what's going to happen out there.
Well, and
I have something to add there.
Yeah, go ahead.
You know, I think people might be surprised that it's not that fast of a pace, but something else they might be surprised at is there's not a lot of downtime. So while you might be going at a slower rate, you're not stopping every 5 minutes or 10 minutes. You know, everyone does something at the same time, so you're minimizing the stopping time, and that goes a long way. And even at transitions, if you can speed up your transition, that all plays into the pace and how much you can get done of the race.
Yeah, we're going to talk in 2 weeks about the teaming up and how team expectations and teammates play into racing, and how like you're only as fast as your slowest racer. And that can be, I mean, people that watched Eco Challenge, right? We we saw what happened to Bend at the very beginning, was super elite team who had a teammate that pushed past their limit, and it ended up holding the rest of the team back. So Jesse, talk about that like the team dynamics and how to make sure that you're communicating those expectations ahead of time. I mean, you've
that's a
jumped
tough
on a lot of
question.
teams. And so, I mean, when you're having those discussions about like, hey, what are we doing and how are we doing that? Like, what does that kind of communication look like?
I mean, part of that is when you're forming the team. I mean, and you're going to talk about forming a team soon. Is, you know, when I text somebody, hey, do you want to go try to win this race, or do you want to go to this race for fun? You know, those expectations are set at the beginning. I think that's a big part of it. It's tough with like pre-race team talks. Like those don't always play out in reality. It's good to get to know your teammates beforehand, but sometimes you don't know somebody until you get out there on the course, and then you really get to know people. I haven't figured that part out yet.
Well, and you know, I think we were talking about like teammates and how like injuries and taking care of each other like kind of play into this. Andy, like talk a little bit about like making sure that you're taking care of each other, and how that, like, what are the key things to think about as far as like health wise as you're out there on these expedition length races?
Well, I think the biggest thing is to talk, and when someone stopped talking, you figure out why. Some people just need some quiet time, and that's okay, right? But sometimes that can be a sign that they're really kind of hurting, you know. So, you know, grab their pack or whatever, and just ask them if you can help. Give them something new to eat. A lot of what makes the great teams great is that they know each other so well that they can get a sense of what's happening and what that person is feeling, and the person doesn't even have to say anything. You know, that's, I think, one of the magical things about some of the best teams in the world, is that they're just so in tune with each other and so selfless, right, and willing to help. I think that's really important. But I think for newer teams, I think just talking and being really honest about how you're feeling, and if somebody really is like really hurting, pushing them past their limits is, like, on day one of a 4-day race, is probably not the best thing, right? So being okay if you're the one feeling amazing and your teammate is really, really hurting, saying, okay, hey, let's stop, let's eat something, let's figure out what we can do to help you, because that's what's going to make the team continue to move forward. You know, dragging them around for 2 more days is might not end well.
Yeah, Chip and Andrew, I think we talked about this after Worlds last year, and how you guys each had different sections of the race where you were at your lowest and needed to be picked up by your teammates, both physically and mentally. Do you want to touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, I'd love to pick up where Andy left off, which he was right on track. And basically it's don't break stuff, don't break people. Like on a short race, it's just balls to the wall, like you said. But on a long race, you're like, we just flew around the world. We cannot ruin this race because of some stupid error. So things like your feet, like you have to take the time to stop and fix your feet. Like I know Bend Racing on their podcast, they were talking about their entire team stops and everybody fixes their feet on a schedule, like every 4 to 5 hours. Doesn't matter if your feet are feel good or not. Get them out, dry them out, lube them, let's go, because feet are what take you out of a race. But the same thing with chafing. I mean, just it doesn't matter where it is, but chafing can wreck a teammate. But also when we were talking about nutrition and the hydration, your body can only absorb so much liquid like per hour and so many calories per hour. So when you get into that deficit and you're behind on either one, it's not like you can guzzle 2 liters of water and you're hydrated again. Your body can't absorb it that fast. Same with calories. I think Nick Herf on the Dark Zone podcast was talking about the biology behind it. You can't just crush 2,000 calories and then all of a sudden that's in your muscles, you're ready to go. Your body can only take on, I think it was 200 or 300 calories per hour using digestion to get that into glycogen and burnable. So it's those things that you got to think about when you're doing the longer races, is that you're in this for a really long period of time. Everything you do has to be sustainable. You're not, you know, burning all your matches at once, basically.
Yeah. Mary, do you have something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add on. It's something I've seen with some newer racers is is you can't be afraid to just stop and take a break. Like if you well, it doesn't mean the race is over. Come into the TA, sit for 4 hours. Like unless you have a cutoff time that you have to get out, or maybe check out the TA and then sit down. Like there's so many ways that you can let somebody recover. And when you have a multi-day race, usually you have time. So whoever's sick on day 1 is probably going to be your rock star day 4. It's about, adjusting and taking the time to let that person recover. And, also if one person's sick, sometimes the rest of the team recovers while you're trying to take care of that one teammate. But there's no reason to quit a race just because someone's not feeling well. You just, if you can, take the time and let them rest. I've done it in a 24-hour race. We let a guy sit down for 3 hours and he finished the race, whereas he wanted to quit earlier. I'm like, no, we're here together. We're not going to go on without you. So let's just let you recover. And that's always an option.
Yeah, I think I talked several people at Epic last week that were feeling it in the middle of the night. Like, look, just go over to Downriver Canoe, go up there and sleep on a bench, go for a couple hours. I'll come wake you up. And then wake up, you're going to feel like $1 million. You're going to thank me because you're going to go back out in the park and you're going to get some more points, because I've had those regrets. I mean, Jeff, you told me that I was going to have that regret after C2C 2 years ago. And I did when I went home. Because I didn't just take the time to recover and see how I felt later. I mean, Jeff, you talked about that, to me that night, and I've heard you tell plenty of other athletes the same thing.
Yeah, this year was a big surprise that we had almost 11 to 12 teams drop in the first day of the C2C, which has never happened before. And the opening paddle really hit them by surprise. And I think what they were really looking for was an out. They could have continued, but they let one person not feel well, and the next thing you know it, the whole team is convinced that they can't continue, and that's not necessarily true. The big rule of thumb is just get to a TA and rest. You have 3 days to finish that race. You have plenty of time to rest, recover, and continue to move forward.
And don't make decisions at your lowest point or your highest, right? Like you don't want to make those decisions at either of those places, because that can be detrimental in both ways. Mark, I mean, go ahead.
James Thurlow, who ran Open Adventure out of the UK for a decade or more. If you came into a transition area and said you were done, he wouldn't let you drop out of his races. He would tell you to go sleep for 3 hours and then come back. And if you still wanted to drop out, then he would consider it. And that's a good thought, right? Don't drop out when you get there. Sleep, eat, and then see how you feel. And a lot of times you're ready to go again. I mean, Andy, we were racing in Ecuador and we stopped for, 12 hours.
12 hours.
And then he got up, he was a new man. He's like, okay, I'm ready to go. And we were all like, oh, we thought we were done. And all of a sudden we're back on our bikes and heading out, for a 100-mile bike ride. So you just never know.
Well, and that's
Yeah,
awesome.
I mean, Hunter wanted day 5. Hunter wanted to stop. And we just basically let him just sleep and go put him in a hospital for, 5 or 6 hours. And he was brand new.
Yeah. So I want to kind of finish this off, because this has been a fantastic discussion, but I want you to kind of share your craziest, funniest, scariest story from expedition racing. Because now we've got everybody locked into doing them. I want them to see what they're getting into. So, who wants to start? Because I know everybody's got something where they're like, wow, this was just insane.
I got a quick one. C2C, one of the years, the checkpoint was like across, we didn't paddle to the point, we hiked through the swamp to get it. And there's this big old gator sitting there, between me and the checkpoint, and I had to jump in the water. And Ron Eaglin's back there too. And I'm like, Ron, what do I do? He's like, just jump in, it'll move out of the way. And so I'm like, there's no way, there's an alligator. It's like an 8-foot alligator. And he's like, no, you're good. Just Ron Eaglin, you're good, just jump in. And so I jumped in this, chest high water. This alligator jumped in right next to me and it didn't eat me. That was a fun little area where I got to overcome a fear.
That is pretty crazy. Who else has got something good?
I think my being creative during an expedition race is exciting when the race director throws a hurdle at you. Obviously, it aired on Eco Challenge where Hunter and I and our team had billies that we had built, and going down this river, and it was horrible because all they gave us were these long poles, and we discovered that you could cut them in half and make a kayak paddle out of them. And I thought that was really fun. It was really cool, real creative, and that was probably one of the funniest times during races. We laughed so much after that and had such a great time paddling down the river instead of just pushing those sticks into the mud.
Well, I think people, I mean, obviously when you're doing races where you're up for multiple days, there's probably things that were super funny at the time that you tell the story later and you're like, it really wasn't that funny, but you're so like exhausted and beat down that it's funny. Anybody have any scary moments other than the gator where you're like, I don't know if we're making it out of here? Mary, I see you kind of.
Oh, no. Well, Chip and I were talking about this today, like what we thought our most amazing, experience was. And there are so many. We could hardly decide. We finally decided on the Expedition Africas that we've done. We've done 3 of them. And the very first one was in Rodrigues. And that race went around an island, and the boats were our transition area. And the very opening leg was a sailing experience, and wow, it was so crazy. You should describe the boat scene, but that race in particular, we did it all. We did snorkeling, we had underwater checkpoints, we had caving, we had zip lines and via ferratas and rappelling, and it was amazing.
Yep.
But that opening.
The opening was crazy because there were these boats that were like a big canoe. They had a keel, but they had this rudder, but it could be removed. And the sail, the what do you call it? The mast had to be lifted up to move the sail over and put back down. And you're trying to do this in the middle of the race. And there's like 50 boats and everybody's banging into each other. And we had a local guide on every boat. They've all been drinking all day. I mean, it was absolutely crazy. If you guys want to see it, we do have it on our YouTube page. We have like 3 minutes of this start. But at the end of the day, and then you get off this boat and you dive down to get this point, and then you snorkel to shore almost a kilometer against the current. And it was like, whoa, like this was the craziest race start ever. So I think that was our most unique. It was amazing.
And a little scary.
And scary. Yeah. Many boats got tipped over. I mean, they were hammering into each other and crashing. It was dangerous in addition to fun. Yeah.
Mark, any great stories?
Probably one or two. So one that comes to mind, one of the Patagonia races, which is if you're not familiar, is a 10-day race down in Chilean Patagonia. And they call it the last wild race, and with good reason, because you're out in areas where you feel like no people have ever been. It's just wilderness. And every trek, there's no trails. So if it's a 50-mile trek, it's 50 miles of bushwhacking, because that's just right. And every single one is like that. So we were just trying to finish this 4-day trek at the end of the race, and not having good luck. A thunderstorm came and kicked us off the ridge we were on. And anyway, we were trekking down a beach, exhausted, and we decide we're going to stop at this rock that we could see like in the distance, not very far, maybe 500 meters or something. And as we get closer, we're like, okay, this is great, and we're all thinking about it. And all of a sudden the rock like rears up, and it's this massive elephant seal, and it lumbers into the ocean. And so we're like, okay, we're not going to stop at the rock. Anyway, yeah.
And that, I'm sure that was mixed with sleep monsters, and you're like, I don't know if this is real or if it's
right.
not.
It probably was a rock, for all we know.
Well, guys, listen, I want to thank you for taking the time. I think that having more conversations like this, where we're giving people knowledge about what it takes to get involved in expedition racing and show that like it's not as scary as it seems. I mean, I know most people, when they're thinking about like doing a multi-day event, they're scared to death because how am I going to go out and do it? And the answer is one foot in front of the other, right? Like you just keep moving forward. You go at your pace, at your ability, and you go out and you take a chance. Like that's what I've heard from every single one of you. And so if you can hear that from these people, like know that they are there, they are doing it. And I hope that you will get out and do it. I hope that you will continue to join us for the other two parts of our educational AR101s this month. As next on the 15th, we're going to cover teaming up, and on the 29th, we're going to cover basically getting started in adventure racing. So thank you guys for taking the time. I look forward to seeing you guys at more races, and I hope that you guys will continue to like and follow Warrior Racing. I hope that you'll like and follow AR.watch, and I hope that you'll keep continuing to get out there and live the adventure. So thank you guys.
Thanks, Doug.
Thanks.
Good job.
Thanks, Doug. See you, buddy.
Hey, Hunter, stay on real quick.
Okay.
It's good seeing